Carl Jung. The name itself conjures images of shadowy depths, arcane symbols, and a mind that dared to map the vast, uncharted territories of the human psyche. But when we attempt to define this colossus of 20th century thought, we immediately encounter a profound, unsettling ambiguity. Was Carl Jung a meticulous, empirical scientist, grounding his revolutionary theories in observable data and clinical practice? Or was he, at his core, a mystic, a visionary who communed with the numinous and drew his deepest insights from experiences that transcend rational explanation? This question, Carl Jung, was he a mystic, scientist, or both, isn't just an academic debate. It strikes at the heart of how we understand consciousness, the nature of reality, and the very path to self-realization. To dismiss one aspect in favor of the other is to misunderstand Jung entirely and perhaps to misunderstand ourselves. Today, we peel back the layers, confront the paradox, and explore the extraordinary landscape of a mind that refused to be confined by conventional boundaries, forcing us to ask whether these categories are truly as separate as we believe. Let us first anchor ourselves in the undeniable, the empirical, the world of Carl Gustav Jung the scientist. To overlook this foundation is to build a caricature, a straw man easily dismissed by those uncomfortable with the more profound, and perhaps disturbing implications of his later work. Jung was, by training and initial inclination, a man of medicine, a psychiatrist. He wasn't some armchair philosopher idly speculating about the soul from a detached ivory tower. His journey began in the rigorous, demanding environment of the Burgersley Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich, a crucible where the raw, often terrifying realities of mental illness were confronted daily. It was here, under the tutelage of Eugen Bleuler, the man who coined the term schizophrenia, that Jung honed his skills of clinical observation and empirical investigation. Think about the context, the early 20th century. Psychology was a fledgling discipline, desperate for scientific legitimacy, striving to break free from the shackles of mere philosophy and speculation. Jung was deeply immersed in this quest. His early work, particularly the word association tests, stands as a testament to his scientific rigor. These weren't casual conversations. They were controlled experiments designed to uncover the hidden complexes, those emotionally charged clusters of ideas and memories residing in the unconscious. He meticulously measured response times, physiological reactions, and the nature of verbal responses, seeking patterns, seeking objective evidence for the unseen dynamics of the psyche. This was pioneering work. He wasn't just theorizing about the unconscious. He was developing tools to empirically demonstrate its influence on conscious behavior and thought. This work brought him international recognition and, crucially, it brought him to the attention of Sigmund Freud. The initial alliance between Jung and Freud was built on a shared commitment to establishing a science of the unconscious. Freud saw in Jung a brilliant successor, someone who could carry the torch of psychoanalysis into the future. For a time, Jung was Freud's crown prince. But Jung, the empiricist, could not long remain subservient to dogma, even Freud's. His scientific integrity, his insistence on grounding theory in observable phenomena, ultimately led to their painful but inevitable split. Jung found Freud's emphasis on infantile sexuality as the sole driver of psychic life too restrictive, not because of some moral prudishness, but because his own clinical observations with a wider range of patients, particularly those suffering from psychoses like schizophrenia, pointed to a broader, more complex psychic reality. He saw myths, religious motifs, and archetypal patterns emerging from his patients that could not be adequately explained by personal history alone. This was Jung the scientist, daring to follow the data even when it led him away from the established theories of his powerful mentor. Consider his development of psychological types, the concepts of introversion and extroversion, and the four functions of thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. This wasn't arbitrary categorizing. It stemmed from years of careful observation of how different individuals habitually perceive the world and make decisions. He sought to create a systematic framework, a typology that could help understand and predict patterns of behavior and experience. This is the work of a scientific mind, one dedicated to classification, to identifying underlying principles, to building models that can be tested and refined. He wasn't just interested in the what of the psyche, but the how. How does it operate? What are its consistent structures and functions? Even his exploration of dreams, often cited as evidence of his mystical leanings, was approached with a scientific mindset, at least initially. While Freud saw dreams primarily as wish fulfillments rooted in repressed personal experiences, Jung, through the meticulous collection and analysis of thousands of dreams, his own and his patients', began to see them as a natural, purposeful product of the psyche. He saw them not just as a repository of repressed material, but as a source of prospective guidance, a form of inner communication attempting to bring balance and wholeness to the individual. He looked for recurring symbols, for patterns, for connections to broader cultural mythologies, treating the dream as a rich dataset offering insights into the psyche's ongoing process of self-regulation. His method was amplification, comparing dream images to myths, fairy tales, and cultural symbols from around the world to illuminate their deeper archetypal meanings. This comparative approach, while drawing on diverse cultural material, was still rooted in an attempt to find consistent, observable patterns in human symbolic expression. The charge that Jung abandoned science often stems from a misunderstanding of what he considered to be empirical. For Jung, the psyche was a natural phenomenon, and its manifestations, dreams, fantasies, visions, even psychotic delusions, were all data. He believed that if something could be experienced, it was real in its effects, and therefore worthy of scientific investigation, however unconventional. He argued that psychology, to be true to its subject matter, could not afford to limit its scope only to what was quantifiable in a laboratory in the strictest physical sense. The inner world, with its subjective richness, demanded an empirical approach suited to its own nature. Ignoring this scientific bedrock of Jung's work leads to a dangerous oversimplification. It allows critics to dismiss his more challenging concepts as mere fantasy or ungrounded speculation. But the truth is, Jung's later, more mystical explorations were often undertaken because his scientific observations pushed him beyond the limits of conventional materialistic science. He didn't abandon science, he sought to expand its frontiers to encompass the full spectrum of human experience. To understand Jung, one must first appreciate the rigorous, disciplined, and often courageous scientific mind that laid the groundwork for all that followed. He was a scientist of the soul, and his laboratory was the human experience itself, in all its perplexing depth and complexity. He was willing to look where others turned away, to listen to what others dismissed as noise, and in doing so, he charted new territories for psychology, territories we are still exploring today. The courage to follow the evidence, even into the unsettling unknown, that is the mark of a true scientist. But to confine Carl Jung solely to the laboratory, to the neat categorizations of an empirical scientist, is to engage in a profound act of intellectual violence, a reduction that strips away the very essence of his most transformative and enduring contributions. For if Jung was a scientist, he was one who dared to peer so deeply into the crucible of the human psyche that he found himself face to face with the numinous, the archetypal, the very wellsprings of what humanity has historically called the sacred. The case for Jung as a mystic is not just compelling, it is overwhelming, woven into the fabric of his personal life, his most challenging theories, and the very soul of his work. Let's be clear what we mean by mystic in this context. It's not about adherence to a specific religious dogma or engaging in seance-like theatrics. It's about a direct, experiential engagement with dimensions of reality that transcend the purely material and rational. It's about the apprehension of a deeper, symbolic order underlying existence. It's about the journey into the inner cosmos and the discovery of transpersonal truths. By this definition, Jung was undeniably a mystic, perhaps one of the greatest of the modern era, albeit one who often cloaked his mystical insights in the language of psychology. His own life was punctuated by profound, often unsettling, paranormal and visionary experiences. Memories, dreams, reflections, his autobiography is replete with them. From his childhood dreams of a subterranean phallic god to his later visions during a period of intense, creative illness following his break with Freud, Jung was no stranger to the eruption of the unconscious in its most raw and powerful forms. He didn't dismiss these experiences as pathological. Instead, he engaged with them, wrestled with them, sought to understand their meaning. His famous confrontation with the unconscious, documented in the privately held Red Book, Liber Novus, for decades and only published long after his death, reveals a man deliberately journeying into the depths of his own psyche, encountering archetypal figures, and engaging in active imagination to an almost shamanistic degree. This wasn't mere intellectual curiosity. It was a deeply personal, often terrifying, quest for meaning and integration, a direct immersion in the mythopoetic substratum of the mind. The Red Book is not a scientific treatise. It is a prophetic, visionary work, a testament to a soul grappling with the ultimate questions of existence, God, and the human condition. This personal journey into the mystical profoundly shaped his theories. Consider the concept of the collective unconscious. While its existence might be inferred from cross-cultural similarities in myths and symbols, and empirical observation, its nature, as Jung described it, is deeply mystical. It is a transpersonal layer of the psyche, inherited, universal, containing the archetypes of primordial images and patterns that are the psychic residue of eons of human experience. These archetypes, the shadow, the anima animus, the wise old man, the great mother, and ultimately the self, are not just psychological constructs. They are living, numinous powers that shape our perceptions, emotions, and destinies. To encounter an archetype for Jung was to touch something sacred, something that resonates with the deepest chords of human existence. The self, in particular the archetype of wholeness and the regulating center of the psyche, Jung often equated with the imago Dei, the image of God within. This is not the language of a purely materialist scientist. It is the language of a man who has experienced the divine, however he might define it, within the human soul. Then there is synchronicity, Jung's concept of a causal connecting principle. This refers to meaningful coincidences, events that are connected not by a linear chain of cause and effect, but by their shared meaning. Jung was fascinated by such occurrences which defied rational, mechanistic explanation. His formulation of synchronicity was an attempt to provide a framework for understanding these uncanny events, which often have a powerful, numinous quality, suggesting an underlying interconnectedness of mind and matter, a hidden order in the universe. While he attempted to explore it with a scientific spirit, collaborating with physicist Wolfgang Pauli, the very idea points to a reality far stranger and more mysterious than conventional science typically allows. It hints at a participatory universe where psyche and cosmos are not separate but intimately intertwined, a core tenet of many mystical traditions. Furthermore, Jung's profound engagement with esoteric traditions underscores his mystical inclinations. He immersed himself in the study of Gnosticism, with its emphasis on direct knowledge gnosis of the divine, alchemy, which he interpreted not as primitive chemistry but as a complex symbolic system for psychological transformation and the integration of opposites, and Eastern religions, particularly yoga, Buddhism, and Taoism, finding in them sophisticated psychologies of inner development that resonated deeply with his own discoveries. He saw in these ancient traditions not superstition, but profound wisdom concerning the nature of the psyche and the path to individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a whole integrated self. His assertion that the alchemist's quest to transmute base metals into gold was a metaphor for the transformation of the personality, the integration of the shadow, and the realization of the self, is a profoundly mystical interpretation of a seemingly archaic practice. His emphasis on the importance of direct, personal experience of the numinous is another hallmark of the mystic. Jung believed that a purely rational, intellectual approach to life was insufficient for psychological health and wholeness. He argued that humans have a fundamental religious instinct, a need to connect with something larger than themselves, something that imbues life with meaning and purpose. For Jung, the loss of this connection in the modern, secularized world was a primary source of psychic distress. He saw his psychology not just as a therapy, but as a path, a via, for modern individuals to rediscover this vital connection, not through adherence to external dogma, but through the courageous exploration of their own inner depths. To ignore this mystical dimension of Jung is to render his work sterile, to miss its profound power to heal and transform. It's like studying a sacred text purely as literature, ignoring its spiritual import. Jung dared to speak of the soul in an age of disenchantment, to point towards the stars within when humanity was increasingly fixated on the material world alone. His courage lay not just in his scientific rigor, but in his willingness to embrace the mystery, to honor the irrational, and to champion the profound human need for meaning that transcends the purely personal. He was a cartographer of the soul, and his maps lead not just to understanding but to awe. If science seeks to explain the world, mysticism seeks to experience its deeper unity and meaning. Jung, in his own unique way, strove to do both. So we stand at a crossroads, having examined Carl Jung through two seemingly disparate lenses, the meticulous scientist and the profound mystic. The question echoes, Carl Jung, was he a mystic, scientist, or both? To force him exclusively into either category is to diminish his stature and misunderstand the revolutionary nature of his project. The most honest, the most potent answer lies in embracing the complexity. Jung was undeniably both, and more importantly, he demonstrated how these two approaches, often seen as antagonistic, could not only coexist but enrich and inform one another in the exploration of the ultimate frontier, the human psyche. The true genius of Jung lies not in choosing one path over the other, but in his audacious attempt to forge a bridge between them. He was a scientist of the inner world, applying empirical methods, observation, classification, hypothesis, to phenomena that many in the scientific establishment dismissed as too subjective, too ephemeral, too mystical. His clinical work provided the data, the raw material, but his interpretations were often informed by a profound intuitive and symbolic understanding, an openness to the transpersonal dimensions of experience. Think of his work on archetypes. On one level, their existence can be inferred empirically from the recurring patterns in myths, dreams, and cultural symbols across diverse cultures and historical periods, a scientific endeavor. But the experience of an archetype, its numinous power, its capacity to seize and transform an individual, belongs to the realm of the mystical. Jung didn't shy away from this duality, he embraced it. He used the tools of science to explore the terrain of the mystic. Consider his own self-description, his differentiation between his number one personality, the empirical, everyday C.G. Jung, the doctor, the academic, and his number two personality, an older, wiser, more timeless self connected to the ancestral past and the deeper currents of the collective unconscious. This inner duality wasn't a sign of pathology for Jung, it was a source of his creativity and insight. His scientific self provided the discipline and the framework, while his mystical self provided the depth, the connection to the numinous, and the courage to explore uncharted waters. He understood that a purely rational, materialistic science was ill-equipped to grasp the full spectrum of human experience, particularly the reality of the psyche, which by its very nature includes the irrational, the symbolic, and the spiritual. Jung's approach suggests that the perceived schism between science and mysticism is, in many ways, a modern Western construct, a product of the Enlightenment's understandable but ultimately limiting overemphasis on pure reason. Jung, by contrast, seemed to intuit that a true understanding of the psyche required a Copernican revolution of its own, one that placed subjective experience and inner reality on par with objective, external reality as a valid field of inquiry. He wasn't anti-science. He was arguing for a broader science, one capable of accommodating the full complexity of what it means to be human. He saw the psyche not as a mere epiphenomenon of brain chemistry, but as a vast, autonomous reality with its own laws and dynamics, a reality that speaks in the language of symbols, myths, and dreams. To decipher this language, one needs both the analytical tools of the scientist and the intuitive receptivity of the mystic. His concept of individuation, the central aim of his psychology, is itself a synthesis of these two poles. Individuation is the lifelong journey towards becoming a complete, integrated, and unique individual. This process involves a rigorous, honest confrontation with one's own unconscious, the shadow, the anima animus, which requires keen self-observation and psychological insight, the scientific aspect. But it also involves an opening to the transpersonal, the archetypal, and the numinous dimensions of the self, which often entails experiences that feel profoundly mystical. Wholeness for Jung meant integrating the rational and the irrational, the conscious and the unconscious, the personal and the collective, the scientific and the spiritual. His life's work was a testament to this integrative vision. The modern tendency to create rigid dichotomies, science or mysticism, reason or intuition, matter or spirit, would have struck Jung as a sign of psychological imbalance, a failure to embrace the tension of opposites which he saw as essential for psychic life and growth. He understood that true knowledge, especially knowledge of the soul, often arises from holding that tension, from dwelling in the ambiguity, rather than prematurely resolving it in favor of one pole. His exploration of alchemy is a perfect example. He saw it not as failed chemistry but as a symbolic representation of the individuation process, where the alchemist, the scientist of inner transformation, sought to unite warring elements opposites to create the philosopher's stone, the integrated self, a mystical achievement. Therefore, to ask if Jung was a mystic or a scientist is perhaps to ask the wrong question, or at least to frame it too narrowly. He was a pioneer who operated at the very edge where these domains meet and interpenetrate. He was a scientist of the soul, and the soul, as he understood it, is inherently mystical. He used the rigor of scientific inquiry to validate the reality of mystical experience, and he drew upon the deep well of mystical traditions to illuminate the findings of his psychological research. He challenged the limitations of both a soulless science and an ungrounded mysticism. The enduring power of Jung's work, and the reason we are still grappling with this question today, is precisely because he refused to be confined. He forces us to expand our own definitions, to question our own intellectual boundaries. He showed us that the study of the psyche in its deepest sense is both a scientific endeavor and a spiritual quest. He demonstrated that one could be rigorously empirical in investigating phenomena that are, by their very nature, profoundly mysterious and deeply personal. In the end, Carl Jung was a cartographer of the liminal spaces, a bridger of worlds. He took the lamp of scientific inquiry into the shadowy, often feared realms of myth, dream, and spirit, and he returned with treasures that continue to enrich our understanding of what it means to be fully human. He wasn't just a scientist who dabbled in mysticism, nor a mystic who used scientific language as a convenient cloak. He was a synthesizer, a visionary who saw the path to wholeness not in the exclusion of one for the other, but in their courageous and often challenging integration. His legacy is not a set of neat answers, but a profound and enduring invitation to explore the vastness of our own inner worlds with both critical intelligence and reverent awe, to become, in our own way, both scientist and mystic in the laboratory of our own lives. What then is the ultimate takeaway from this exploration of Carl Jung? Was he a mystic, scientist, or both? It is this. The question itself reveals more about our own need to categorize and compartmentalize than it does about the man himself. Jung, in his relentless pursuit of understanding the human psyche, transcended such simplistic labels. He was a colossus precisely because he dared to integrate what others kept separate. He was the empirical investigator who meticulously gathered data from the human soul, and he was the visionary who recognized the numinous glow within that data. To label him solely as a scientist is to ignore the profound, transformative spiritual depth that drew him to explore alchemy, Gnosticism, and the symbolic language of the soul. It is to miss the man who underwent his own terrifying and illuminating confrontation with the unconscious, emerging with insights that speak to our deepest spiritual longings. Conversely, to label him merely a mystic is to dismiss the rigorous intellectual discipline, the decades of clinical practice, and the systematic development of concepts like psychological types and the word association tests that formed the bedrock of his empirical approach. The truth, the brutally honest and empowering truth, is that Jung was a pioneer of a more holistic, more integrated way of knowing. He demonstrated that the scientific impulse to observe, analyze, and understand is not inherently at odds with the mystical impulse to experience, connect, and find meaning beyond the material. In fact, for Jung, these were complementary paths to a fuller comprehension of reality, especially the reality of the psyche. His work is a testament to the power of holding the tension of opposites, of allowing in and where convention often insists on an or. So what does this mean for you, for us, grappling with the complexities of modern life, often feeling fragmented and disconnected? Jung's example offers a powerful antidote to the narrowness of vision that plagues so much of contemporary thought. He challenges us to cultivate both our rational, critical faculties and our intuitive, symbolic awareness. He invites us to become explorers of our own inner landscapes, armed with both the precision of a scientist and the openness of a seeker. The call to action here is not to simply decide which label fits Jung best. It is to embrace the Jungian spirit of inquiry in your own life. Dare to question the rigid boundaries you may have inherited or imposed upon your own thinking. Are there aspects of your experience, dreams, intuitions, uncanny coincidences, deep emotional responses to art or nature that you have dismissed because they don't fit a purely rational, materialist worldview? Jung would urge you to pay attention, to record, to reflect, to amplify, to engage with these phenomena as valuable data from your own unconscious. Commit to your own individuation, that unique journey to wholeness that Jung championed. This means courageously confronting your own shadow, those parts of yourself you'd rather not acknowledge. It means engaging with the archetypal energies that shape your life, understanding your inner masculine and feminine principles, and striving for a more conscious relationship with the deeper self. This is not a path for the faint of heart. It requires intellectual honesty, emotional resilience, and a willingness to venture into the unknown territories of your own being. Do not be afraid of complexity, either in Jung or in yourself. Resist the urge for easy answers or simplistic formulas. Jung's legacy is an invitation to a deeper, richer, more nuanced engagement with life. It is a call to develop what one might term psychic ambidexterity, the ability to think critically and analytically, while also perceiving symbolically and intuitively. Ultimately, whether you lean towards seeing Jung more as a scientist who validated mystical realities, or a mystic who employed scientific methods, the power lies in recognizing the synthesis he embodied. He showed us that the quest for knowledge and the quest for meaning are not separate endeavors but two sides of the same coin. He opened a door for a psychology that is not afraid of the soul, and for a spirituality that is not afraid of rigorous inquiry. Take up his challenge. Explore his writings, yes, but more importantly, explore yourself with the same fearless curiosity and integrative spirit that defined Carl Jung. In doing so, you will not only gain a deeper appreciation for this extraordinary thinker, but you will also unlock profound potentials for growth, healing, and self-realization within your own life. The question is not just about Jung, it's about the kind of understanding we are willing to cultivate, the kind of wholeness we are willing to strive for. Embrace the both, and that is where the true power lies.